Do you want this scene on video?
Yeah, send it.
Like, no, I'm filming, but do you want the words to be able to be seen by the audience? You're going to need to wrap bigger.
Yeah, that's okay. I'll talk about it. This is just for me to talk about it. Okay. How to progress inside of a program. So most people don't stay in a program long enough, right? Most people tend to hit the fourth week potentially of consistency, which, hey, if you've hit 4 weeks consistently, like, good on you. But what we tend to see is that by the fourth week, progression as it has been in the past 4 weeks starts to plateau. So what's really happening here? So linear progression tends to happen, a progression load or reps tends to happen. And then by the fourth week, that starts to just like waver. Maybe your first couple exercises, you're progressing. Maybe those first couple exercises tend to be your favorite exercise, so you add a little bit more intensity. Maybe by the third week, that wavering of intensity tends to be mitigated predominantly because you're putting a lot of effort into your first couple exercises, which you should. And then you forget that you have to provide that same type of intensity on your last couple exercises. And by the third or fourth week, you kind of understand that that needs to happen. So then that wavering intensity starts to come off, and you start to progress in every other exercise. And then plateaus start to happen because now you're starting to waver on the understanding of, oh, I have to sustain this intensity throughout the whole session. How do I do this? And so we've talked about progressive overload a lot, right? A lot of trainers, a lot of coaches, your friend, your mum, your sisters always talk about progressive overload is the most important part in your training, but what does that really look like? So we need progressive overload to be a progression load or reps, obviously with the same form, right? Like if we're doing a chest press, the goal is that your rib cage is stacked, and I want my arms directly under the barbell at all times, and I want to press, really getting that like internal rotation of my humerus, and then coming out to the side without like flaring my ribs. Like from week 1 to week 12, that's like, that doesn't change. The load has to progress for you to actually facilitate that muscular adaptation while keeping the same form. So first 4 weeks of a program, we define that as like a acclimation phase. And this is where the skill component comes in neurologically as well as intermuscularly. So those words pretty much mean neurologically, we're defining as our mind and our nervous system is getting used to doing the movement, providing intensity, turning on and off certain muscles, and just like doing the movement properly, right? Like how many times have you done a chest press and then your coach gives you a different way to do it and then you have to learn that way? Or you're new to training, so now you're learning how to just do the movement altogether. And then we've got neuromuscular. So that's where your muscles turn on and off relevant towards the exercise, right? So how many times have you done potentially a new exercise and you're not, and other muscles are being involved or recruited instead of just the one muscle doing the movement? And so your first couple weeks or 4 weeks or 5 weeks, depending on the skill required to do the movement, it takes time for certain muscles to turn on and off and coordinate better. So that's the acclimation phase. And that tends to be the first 4 weeks. And then after that, we've got like an acclimation phase. Oh God, now I've lost the word. Accumulation. That was acclimation. Now we're at accumulation phase. And this is where we're accumulating load, intensity, or effort, as well as like using all that skill, coordination, neuromuscular, intermuscular, and putting it all together and actually now forcing intramuscular force or intramuscular adaptation. So that's where we're now forcing the muscle to grow. So what did the first 4 weeks mean? So if you're saying that the first 4 weeks wasn't muscle building, what was that? It's like, what is arguably muscle building, but there's a neurological phase that comes into play where we have to coordinate better until we show the muscle that we've got it, we know what we're doing, and now we can do it properly. Properly enough that it forces the muscle to change. And so that's where people start to plateau, people start to come off of programs and then hop onto a next one. And I truly believe if you get to the point of 4 weeks of a program, just stick at it. Just because plateauing is happening, that's probably a good sign. That means now you're trying to force adaptation through the muscle, and you should just keep going because that learning phase is over with. So what affects muscle adaptations? From a vacuum of your capacity to keep progressing every program, effort, rep scheme, cadence, movement selection / order, and reps in reserve. So effort, way we look at it is that inevitably your goal is to progress in every movement, from the first exercise all the way to the last exercise, but we also want effort inside of the exercise itself. Let's go with this. Most exercises have like 2 to 3 warm-ups. And then we've got our working set, and this is where we're actually trying to progress from the week prior. We can start with 1 and then move on to 2, maybe onto our 10th week, where we're like, cool, like that skill component, that learning component is all the way done. And now it's time to get the most out of our session, because I think it'd be silly to try to do drop sets or intensification techniques on your first 4 weeks of a program, because you're learning how to do the thing. You've done the exercise before, and I don't doubt that, but I think there's a phase in which you have to learn how to coordinate through effort, cadence, movement selection, reps and reserve, all of that before you are technically proficient enough to then force muscular adaptation. So your first 2 to 3 warm-ups, this is where your effort and reps are going to be the opposite. So that effort is going to be increased, or that difficulty is going to be increased, and your reps should decrease. So probably that effort it's an ascending or descending. So your reps should be like, maybe let's go with a 12, and then maybe a 10, and then your working set can be an 8. And so that first set of 12, that could feel like a 5 out of 10. That second set of 10, that could feel like a 7 out of 10. And then that working set, that should feel like a 9 out of 10. Should we do a 10 out of 10? For sure, send it. I'd potentially I'll just back off a little bit, because your goal is progress. And if you're just putting 10 out of 10 into everything that you're doing right now, by your last exercise, you might not be able to progress in that. I'm not saying to not don't train hard, but there's a component of if you can't finish a rep and you form faults, then you're no longer doing the movement. And then you got rep scheme. So this is what we were talking about before, about if you do 15, 12, 10, and you do a leg press or a squat, or even like a barbell bench press, could you imagine progressing on that last set if your first 2 sets were that high? So I would start considering the exercise selection and the rep scheme you provide for that exercise. So maybe lateral raises, maybe bicep curls, anything of that intensity, you could probably put that high of reps. But if it requires a lot of skill, requires a lot of stability and coordination, I probably wouldn't go higher than 12 reps. So then the rep scheme itself, and you're proficient after the first 4 weeks, can probably look like a 10, an 8, and then whatever top set that you want to pick until you then add load. So the next one is cadence. So cadence is pretty much tempo, right? So we look at all movements as 4 stages in a movement. Let's go with the bench press. So we're just going to control that negative for 2 seconds, hold that lengthened static for a second, and then push as hard as we can in the concentric phase, and then hold that shortened position for a second. We want to own every position before we progress. If we're jumping out in every movement, we're definitely not going to progress, because it's more connective tissue, it's more stretch reflex, and not the actual muscle belly. So if we perfect the cadence, my favorite cadence, I'm going to start from the negative, because most movements start from the negative, would be a 2, 1, explode, 1. If you just use that tempo for all your movements, you will progress. I like a 2-second negative. I like a 1-second hold, even a 2-second hold for a lengthen. In the concentric portion of the view in which you're exploding, I need you to really go through the move as hard as you can. And a 1 to 2 second hold in the shorten. A lot of people don't do that stuff. And there's a lot of nuances with that, where it's like, well, where's the most load in this position? What is that muscle trying to, what's the greatest strength curve for that movement? Don't worry about any of that. 2, 1, explode 1 tends to work for most things. And then we've got movement selection and order. So this is looking at like, seems pretty like intuitive. It's like we probably, depending on your training age, we're probably not going to do like a squat or an RDL on the last exercise, because that's going to require a lot of coordination, a lot of intensity, a lot of stability, a lot of overall effort, right? So we're probably, that exercise order is probably going to be more relevant towards how we can like, it's same as a rep scheme. We probably want to start a bit harder and then get lighter in the essence of that intensity of that effort. So movement selection could be like, we could start with something more open. So for me, I don't like starting squats straight away, and I think a lot of people are similar, where we might do a seated leg curl or hamstring curl for opening up the nervous system, exciting, arousing the nervous system, as well as providing some blood into the knees. And then we'll move on to the heaviest movement, being a squat or a leg press. And then maybe we'll do like a leg extension, because it still requires a lot of intensity. And maybe we'll move on to an RDL. The point being is that your movement selection / order needs to be relevant towards the intensity. And if you're finding that you have this high perception of effort, this, oh my God, this movement's gonna be so difficult, probably don't end the session with that. Maybe do it in your second exercise, so that your first exercise can focus on providing a higher arousal state for the nervous system and a warm-up prior to the heaviest or hardest part of the movement. I'd love to do another video on that. And then reps in reserve. This is kind of similar to the effort, because at the end of the day, if your effort inside the gym is like a 6 out of 10 throughout the whole session, then you could probably provide more volume, and progression is going to be a bit easier for you. But if you're training really hard, volume needs to be reduced so that you can consistently keep up that intensity throughout the whole session. When we look at reps in reserve, let's consider back into progression is the form that we're holding, and then progress that through load or reps. And if every time you don't leave any reps in, you just train to failure, but you're forcing reps to happen just to progress. Let's go with like in my head, I'm just doing like an easy bar, like tricep extension. If you, every time that you do your working set, you're like pushing as hard as you can, and you can't actually close that rep or close that motion. And then you're finding by your third week, you're still not progressing. I would then step back and be like, hey, like what if you trained really hard, and then you just was like, you did that last rep, and then you realize that if you tried again, you wouldn't be able to close it, then stop. I think leaving one rep in reserve is probably the best thing for most people. Obviously, if you're new to training, you don't know how many reps you actually have left, and you should try out every other week to progress in trying to understand your idea of what failure really is. And you should utilize that in machine so you can feel safe and comfortable in doing so. But I would say, like, if you leave a 1 RIR or 1 rep in reserve for every working set, send it. This is intensity, cadence 2, 1, explode 1, rep scheme. Do a descending rep order of 12, 10, 8, and then a working set. And then the effort is remembering that you shouldn't put 10 out of 10 on your first warm-ups. Probably do a 5, a 7, and then 9 out of 10 or 11 out of 10.